Oh, there we are.
There we are. So welcome everybody to our Stand for Israel in Minnesota meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 27, 2021. We're meeting again on Zoom. And the topic today is the history of the Soviet Jews and Natan Sharansky and Magnuson. And JoAnn will present. Then she has a couple of videos that she selected. We're going to do a fun interactive quiz and we will have a discussion. So I'm looking forward for another great meeting. Thank all the sponsors. You can see them on your screen right now, the list of them. We talked about it that we are recording, and people that don't want to be seen or heard should mute themselves.
Pardon me.
And oops, you see we have, I might mute everybody right now, so all the phone calls that come in. There we go. So we ask people that don't want to be heard or seen to mute their audio or to stop their video. And we will, I want to thank all of you. I can't say that you came with us because it's, despite the great weather outside, because it's still cloudy and rainy, but God willing, that will all change tomorrow. And I want to thank all the organizations that we listed before. Special thank you for Pastor Mac and Pastor Lynn Hammond of Living Word Christian Center, waiting for the day where we can go back to our regular location there and meet in person and see each other in person. I want to thank Dave and Nancy Smith, our ongoing volunteers. They in advance told us that they have some other commitment for today, that they typically always with us. We'll take a serious commitment for them not to be with us. And of course, it's always my privilege to say that I have these wonderful partners for this program, my co-hosts, JoAnn Magnuson and Deb Campbell. And today is JoAnn's turn to present, and I'm always excited when I get to listen to both of them present. As we said, it's going to be about the history of the Soviet Jews and Natan Sharansky. We will have double points in the quiz today, so it's going to be really fun all the way to the end. Anyone want to find out the information about our meetings or how to join us? You can go to the website that is on your screen right now. And with no further ado, I'm actually going to stop my sharing. I'm going to make JoAnn a co-host.
Okay, very good. I think I've got all of the mechanics working here. The reason I haven't gotten at reading the book about the orphan yet is I'm still reading this book called Never Alone, which is a picture of it over here. And it's written in partnership with Natan Sharansky, who is the former Soviet refusenik who now lives in Israel and has just written this really fantastic book. He's written several fantastic books. I've been following his career since I first heard about him in the mid-1960s. And then in the 70s, I got quite involved with the Soviet Jewry Action Committee here in the Twin Cities. And of course, I was at that time going to the U and studying the history of Israel and the Eastern European stuff, all the stuff that you guys are discovering now that I agree with you is so much fun to discover. I discovered it back in the 60s when I sent my daughter to kindergarten and went back to college. So anyway, but Sharansky has always been one of my favorites, and I had one of his bracelets at one time when it was a big thing back in those days, particularly in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. People in local areas, and there was a Jewish community here that was quite active, and with the support of the Soviet Jews. And they started making bracelets, just little metal bracelets with the names of these people on. And I had one for Sharansky that I wore until some young girl was looking frantically for one and I gave her mine. But anyway, that's kind of how I got involved in Jewish-Christian relations. So it's always been a really important thing to me. And as I read Sharansky's book, I was just really moved and had to stop and grab Kleenexes and wipe my eyes every few pages, because I remember when we were all praying for him and it seemed so impossible that he'd ever get to Israel. And now in his book, he's divided his working life into 3 9-year sections. And he was in prison in the Soviet Union, in the Gulag, for 9 years. And he and his wife got married, and then the next day she had permission to leave Russia and go to Israel. And if she didn't go then, she might not ever get another passport privilege. So they had one night together, and then she went to Israel and thought that it would be a few months and he'd be able to get out. And there was 12 years, and and he was in prison, and much of the time in private where he had to be all alone in a cell. And so anyway, I just thought I'd show you a little quick PowerPoint about that. But he's known in Russia as Anatoly. When he got to Israel, he changed his name. His grandfather's name was Natan, or Nathan, and that was what his father wanted to name him, but they didn't want to name kids anything that sounded too Jewish by the time he was born, because it wasn't popular in Russia. But anyway, we'll get into the story here. And then he met recently with Gil Troy, who is a well-known Israeli author and an American originally. And they put this book together. So and the book tells about his 9 years in prison, his 9 years when he first went to Israel and discovered all the different viewpoints in Israel. And he was in the Knesset for 9 years. And then in the last 9 years, he's been serving with the Jewish Agency and traveling around the world to work with other Jewish organizations and do a lot with young people. But he's got a really kind of quiet but very funny sense of humor, and so his book is well worth reading. So anyway, but back in those days, I see a picture here of one of the Russian prime ministers and the people gathering around and waving Israeli flags, and it was quite a time. So let's see, okay, how can we get started here? Oh yeah, okay. And a lot of this takes place when I was working for the Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. And this was a march in the streets of Jerusalem that the Christian Embassy was part of in 1986. Now, I wasn't working with them anymore at that time. Somebody sent me this picture and they thought I was this person, the girl with the white hat on, because I had a hat like that and a jacket about that color, but I know I wasn't in Jerusalem in 86 at that particular time. But anyway, here we have a picture of Sharansky, and somebody's written there, now living in Israel. He had just arrived in February of 1986. He was trying for 12 years to get to Israel and had been in prison for 9 of those. So anyway, but you always kind of wonder, and I was glad to hear some of you folks talking about digging into the history of that between World War I and World War II, and even the history back into the 1800s as far as what was going on in that part of the world. And the fact that you don't know any of that stuff, I wouldn't have either if I hadn't majored in it in college, and originally had a grandmother who read to me from books from the 1800s, because our school system, even back in those days, was pretty disgusting. I was always angry with my history teachers. They didn't teach anything that I wanted to know, and they made it so simple and dumb that it was annoying. But anyway, but between World War I and World War II, the Russian communists had taken over in Russia, and they were, you know, trying to impose Marxism on everybody. And so while the Russians were partners, they were allies with the British and the Americans and the French, the Western Europeans during World War II. Originally, they'd made a pact with the Germans, and then of course Hitler broke his promises, and so Stalin wanted to break his too. But the Russian troops actually are the ones that liberated the Eastern European, the camps in Eastern Poland. And if you've been on any of our trips or any trips to Poland, you realize that as you get farther east, the camps, both Auschwitz and Majdanek and Sobibor and some of those camps were actually liberated by the Russians because the Russians were in control. And of course, there was a lot at the end of the war, whether Churchill and Roosevelt did the right thing by allowing the Russians to take over in Eastern Europe. And most of us wish they hadn't done that, but there were reasons at that time that they couldn't quite wrap up the war if they didn't do that. Pardon me, I'm thirsty because it's hay fever season. But anyway, one of the things that I remembered and had forgotten about until I started studying up on this week to remind myself is that in July of 1944, which the war was not anywhere near over at that time, because that was the point in time when the Nazis were taking over that part of Hungary, and all of the Hungarian Jews who'd been pretty well protected by their own government, even during the Nazi era. That summer was when people like Elie Wiesel and many others were sent to Auschwitz. They had survived within their home countries up until that point. And then all of a sudden, everything fell apart for them. And the ovens at Auschwitz ran day and night, killing off as many of the Jews from the eastern part of Europe as possible. So I didn't realize that Majdanek had been liberated already in July of that year. But so that was the first one to be liberated. And then this is a picture of that day. And these are Russian soldiers. And they're looking at the gas chambers and the ovens at Majdanek at that time. And then it wasn't until January of 1945 when the other Russian troops took over Auschwitz. And here we see a couple of Russian soldiers, welcoming the prisoners out of the camp. So anyway, in World War II, Russia was an ally of the West. So what happened and many of those soldiers who were, involved in the liberation of the camps were really very warm towards the Jews. And they really didn't realize the Jews were going to go back home and be taken over by the communists and still be suffering for the next 30 years. But anyway, that's just a little bit of the backstory on that, how all of this got started. So the question is often asked, did Stalin care about the Jews? And beyond the long-standing controversies ranging from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was when the Russians thought that the Germans were going to cooperate with them, and then the Soviet Union granted official equality to all citizens regardless of status, sex, race, religion, and nationality. Of course, what they meant by freedom of religion was freedom from religion. So anybody who had any religious values at all was in trouble in the communist world, but that wasn't real clear at the end of the war. And the years before the Holocaust were an era of rapid change. That's when the whole, the whole communist situation was really coming into its own in Russia. Now, at that time, if you remember some of the things we've done on the geography studies about Russia, is the Pale of Settlement was created back in the late 1700s, and all of the Jews were forced to live there. So all these little shtetls that we read about in Fiddler on the Roof and places like that were in the Pale of Settlement. And the Jews were forced to live there, up until this point in history. And so many of the Jews who were there thought communism was going to be a big deal. Actually, Anatoly Sharansky's father was a communist, and he thought, well, that Stalin was just an aberration. I mean, that the other communists would certainly want everybody to be free and have equality and all of that. So they had high hopes once they got past Stalin that things would get better. We will notice that they didn't. But anyway, it was a bad time in those years for the Jews who were forced to live in the Pale of Settlement. And 40% of the population in the former Pale left for the large cities within the Soviet Union. They'd been forced to live in these little towns in the Pale. And so they thought, oh, the Soviet Union and the whole new communist idea is going to be a really good thing. And the emphasis on education and movement from the countryside shtetls to the newly industrial cities allowed many Soviet Jews to enjoy overall advances under Stalin and become one of the most educated population groups in the world. The interesting thing about the Jews is even in all the years that they suffered and they were forced to move from town to town, the whole idea of being jewelers meant that you had to have some kind of a business that you could put in your backpack and get out of town quick once the bad guys came for you. So, and the Jews were always well educated. People educated their children. If the kids weren't allowed to go to a regular school, there were plenty of relatives to educate them. So they were doing pretty well in Russia at this point in time. But, and due to the Stalinist emphasis on the urban population, interwar migration inadvertently rescued a lot of Soviet Jews. Nazi Germany penetrated the entire former Jewish Pale, but the kilometers short of Leningrad and Moscow. And so Jews who moved farther into Russia were able to escape the Nazis. So their expectations were fairly positive at that time. And did Stalin care about the Jews? Nearly 3 million Jews, half of all of the Holocaust victims, died in the Holocaust by bullets, which took place in the Nazi-occupied Soviet territories. And yet the Soviets systematically denied that the Jews were targets of the Nazi atrocities. No memorialization or study of the Holocaust took place. And as a general rule, no monuments were put up over mass execution sites. So even once the Nazis were defeated, the Russians kind of edited the story. They didn't really tell their people that the main victims of the Nazis had been Jews. They were talking about peaceful Soviet citizens. And this phrase was infamous among Holocaust scholars in Russia, in the USSR, because it negated the fact that the vast majority of victims, if not all at the mass execution sites, were Jews. So that was something that the Jews who'd made it into Russia and thought they were doing pretty well didn't realize until later on. And this is the phase that is etched on this is the phrase that is etched on the Soviet monument at Babi Yar, which were famous massacre took place in Ukraine, where 33,000 Jews were murdered in a 2-day period in September 1941, and possibly 50,000 more in the next few months. So that's a huge massacre. And the Russian Jews who weren't there really didn't understand what had happened there. And another phrase, the beautiful, peaceful citizens of Rostov-on-Don, which is the area there by Babi Yar. And that's etched in the memorial at that town where the massacre took place, where 27,000 Jews were murdered in August of 42. So anyway, that's a lot of information, but just to kind of paint that picture so you kind of know the world that Natan Sharansky is coming into. And just a short takeaway here on this. the Bolsheviks were glad to have Jewish support for the revolution back in 1917. But if Jews wanted to practice Judaism, or even not being religious, even if they wanted to practice any of their own Jewish culture, they didn't fit in and they were not welcome in the schools. And life in Russia wasn't a whole lot better. It's better than the Nazis, but anyway, here we meet Natan Sharansky. Anatoly was his Russian name. When he moved to Israel, he changed his name to the name his grandfather wanted him to be named in the first place. But anyway, he was born in January of 1948 in the town called Stalino, for guess who, in Ukraine, which was part of the USSR at that time. Today it's known as Donetsk in Ukraine. But here we see the family. Here's Anatoly, and he was 3 years old. This is 1951. That's his mother, Ida, and his 2-year-old brother, Leonid, and his father, Boris. Now, Boris was a Communist Party member in Ukraine. His older brother had really gotten involved in Zionism and had left for Israel even way before Israel became a state. But Boris thought that, communism was a good thing. And if we just get some decent people at the top, that'll work out. I want to stay in Russia. And he was a member in Ukraine, which of course was part of the Soviet Union at that time. And he was working for one of the Communist Party newspapers. And Anatoly himself, during his youth, was a member of the Komsomol, which was the kind of Boy Scout group that the Russian kids had to belong to. It wasn't like America or Western Europe, where if you wanted to be in the Scouts, that was the choice. And if you didn't, it wasn't a big deal. But here, if you weren't in the organization, you were regarded as not necessarily a faithful communist. And Stalin died in 1953, which all of these happy Jews thought, this will take care of it. Stalin was a bad guy. We wanted to get rid of him, but now we'll get some decent leaders. And then we can see the wonderful things that communism has promised us. Anyway, Natan tells the story. He was in kindergarten and his brother was in second grade, and he's got these 2 little kids, and the father is trying to explain to them the day that they found out that Stalin died. He took his sons aside and set them down, and speaking kind of quietly because other people might be listening, he said, well, we're Jews and Stalin really didn't like us, and we're really pretty happy that he's gone. But you can't say that at school. So you've got to sing the songs they want you to sing tomorrow when all the other students cry when they hear about Stalin dying. You've got to cry. If you feel like crying or not, you've got to cry. You have to pretend to be sad with the other students. And in the book, Natan says that's when he began to learn about a very common practice in the Russian world, double think, that you might have some ideas in your head, but you mustn't say them in front of people who aren't real close to you because they might be reporting you. And of course, there's so many stories in that whole era of children who wanted to be faithful communists. And, the parents couldn't even talk about the things they really, really believed in the presence of the kids. So anyway, that's how that gets started. And Natan learned that Jews were still not accepted fully. I mean, Jews were suspicious about the Jews. They might not feel just the way normal Russian communists and Marxists viewed things. And that he was always told your best bet is to, when you're in high school and college, study math or technology or some kind of science or even the arts or music. That's why when the Russians all came to Israel back in the early 1990s, we used to, all the refugees who came, you'd walk down the main streets in Jerusalem, and on every corner there was a music group, not just one kid with a guitar, but a quartet or a quintet of with basses and violins and flutes and clarinets. Everybody was playing music because they hoped they'd get some money, but because they left Russia with nothing. But anyway, and many of the Jews really got involved in playing chess. And his mother taught him to play chess when he was 5 years old. The same time he learned about doublethink, he learned how to play chess. And he worked at it. And actually, by the time he went to prison, he was able to play chess in his mind without a chessboard in front of him. And he played chess games to keep himself sane while he was in prison. But anyway, Natan was never quite satisfied with all this. He was a really award-winning math student. He got into technology, became a computer expert long before we had laptops in America. But he always felt something was missing. And the idea of doublethink haunted him. The idea that he had to pretend to be sad when he wasn't really was just something that really bugged him. So early on in his young adult life, he became associated with the human rights movement when he was hired to be the English interpreter for Andrei Sakharov, who was one of the well-known dissidents. Now, he was a very famous scientist who had helped with the nuclear physics work in Russian universities, but he too had become a dissident, and he was guarded all the time by KGB people who were spying on him, and he needed an English interpreter. So he hired this young guy, Anatoly, and then later Anatoly emerged in his own right as one of the foremost dissidents and spokesmen for the Soviet Jewry movement. But he always, in his book, he tells about how at the time he realized that he didn't have to believe the things that they were forcing him to say. And he began to realize that it was better to speak the truth and take a chance on going to prison than to have to live in this double-think world. But one of the famous quotes from Sakharov was, "I always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb, and that's why I gave it to my people." He was one of the people who created the first atomic weapon for the Russians. But later he said, "I've come to the conclusion that the most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb, it's the truth." And in 1973, Sharansky applied for an exit visa to go to Israel. Now, in the beginning, he knew very little, and very few of the Jews knew anything about Israel. But when Israel became, when they took over Jerusalem in 67, in the Six-Day War, then the news began to filter into Russia, and the dissidents became much more active, and they realized, well, some of the other Russian dissidents that I've known said they didn't even know until 1967 that Russia, or that Israel was a Jewish place where people actually spoke Hebrew. And that just became, that kind of kicked it all off. Here you see this gathering group. A number of these are famous faces of people, and here's Sharansky. But, and by 73, well, I'd been involved in the concerns for the Soviet Jews, even back in the 60s. Somewhere along the line, I met the guy who was the teacher at, eventually started the Hebrew department, or the Jewish Studies department at the U of M. And pardon me. But anyway, we began to have meetings locally and get the news from Russia. And then people who would go to Russia would be given letters and things to take to these people. And then they were told, go to this park and someone will meet you there carrying an umbrella. And then you'll go with them to someplace else. And then, you know, it was all of this underground stuff going on. But here you see some of the gatherings. And every once in a while, they'd do these big gatherings, and then the people who led them would get arrested and have to go to jail for a while. And Natan, as he got more and more involved in the Soviet Jewry movement, he met Natalia Stiglitz, who later changed her name to the Hebrew Avital. And together, this couple made plans to immigrate to Israel. However, they both applied for exit visas, but the only one that came was Avital's. And if she hadn't left that day, she would not have been able to leave at all. So she went on to Israel. And they were married in 1974, and they had one day together, and then she had to get on the train and leave to go to the West. And so she, you know, she figured he'd be allowed to come, in a few months or so. It was 12 years. But in 1977, this drawing of him appeared on Time magazine. And that's when the Russians and the Americans had been meeting, and the idea of détente was getting really popular. And the Americans, you know, kind of our main leadership really thought we shouldn't really annoy the Russians. They're better than they used to be. We should figure out how to live with them. And of course, that was not a popular idea with the underground dissidents in Russia. But in 1977, Anatoly was arrested and accused of being a spy. He wasn't necessarily a spy, but he was definitely involved in people from the West. And he was convicted of treason in a 1978 show trial, and was sentenced to 13 years in the Gulag, the Soviet system of prison camps marked by horrendous conditions and backbreaking labor, and often solitary confinement. So off he went to prison. But his wife, who made it to Israel, traveled and worked tirelessly for the next 12 years to bring his story to the free world. I remember hearing her on television, and I knew people who'd gone out to Washington to meet with her. Here we see her dressed in prison garb, and the student struggle for Soviet Jewry was the first American national movement created to help free Russian Jews. And they have meetings in big cities all over America. And she came to America and would, you know, dress up in this prison suit, and then these young students would hand out all the literature so people would find out about what was going on. And she also came to America and met with all of any of the government leaders that would open their doors to her. She met several times with President Reagan, and Reagan really took an interest in this, and he really helped them very much. But here's Senator Dole, who was a good friend of my old friend Esther Levins. He was a congressman from Kansas, and he met on several occasions also with Avital. So the grassroots groups in America had begun back in the 1950s, but they grew and continued until communism fell in 1990. And here you see some of the Jewish groups with the Torah scrolls marching through the streets throughout America. This woman is wearing one of the bracelets, and here are pictures of some of the bracelets. There was Vladimir Slepak, and Ida Nudell was one of the well-known ones. Mark Dimschitz was one of the guys who tried to take over an airplane and was arrested and sent to prison. I actually met him. He was married to an Israeli woman, and we had coffee at his house one night years ago, but he finally made it to Israel. But actually, one of the things I learned from hanging out with some of the Russian Jews is if they give you a glass with something in it, don't drink it unless you're really fond of very strong vodka. getting together with they had an amazing capacity. They could drink vodka by the bottle and still make sense, but everybody else fell on the floor. But recently, there was an interview with Natan on one of the YouTube things last week from camera, and he was saying that he was rescued by groups of students and housewives, and the Russians had said at that time that that's all there were in America, that the American politicians weren't interested in helping the Soviet Jews. It was just these silly housewives and students. But I was one of the housewives, so I was pleased to be in that. And here's a picture of one of his bracelets. The name is kind of worn off, but I had one very much like that I had for some years. I finally gave it to a young woman in the Jewish community who was looking all over for one of Anatoly's bracelets, and I passed it on to her. But anyway, it was really touching for me to read this book and remember those days, because while I got involved in working in Israel, in being interested in Christian support for Israel and Christian Zionism, but I had already met a lot of the local Jews by working on behalf of the Soviet Jewish groups. Dr. Steve Feinstein is the one I was mentioning before, and I met him when he was working for one of the state colleges over in Wisconsin. He came from a family that spoke Russian, so he knew Russian really well, and he was taking students from Wisconsin back in the 60s to Russia, and then they figured out that he was one of the dangerous ones. He was sneaking stuff in, so he was blackballed. He was on the blacklist in the KGB. And so then he was training other people, and I met him during that period of time. He was such a great guy. He died way too young. He was only in his 60s. He dropped dead at a movie showing at the JCRC back in 2008. I was in the hospital with pneumonia at that time, so I didn't get to go to his funeral. But he always, once I got involved with him and he came to Minnesota and started the department at the U, he always invited me to come whenever he had foreign speakers coming. And several of them, I wound up having dinner parties at my house and getting kosher food for them, and then inviting all my friends in to meet them. And he used to call me up and say, "Hey, JoAnn, there's this group called Jews for Jesus. I think we should start one called Christians for Moses." And so this went on for years, and every now and then he'd say, "It's your turn to be the head of Christians for Moses this year." And I'd call him and say, "Yeah, it's your turn next year." It was a big joke anyway, but had lots of fun with him. He was a great guy. And the housewives and the students kept going, and gradually it got more uncomfortable. And when Reagan became president, he was really interested in pushing back on this. And he didn't think that just having peace and harmony with the Russians under communism was a good thing. So again, pictures of these young kids, and a lot of the students here eventually went to Russia and began smuggling things in. And then there were also Christians at this time who were also suffering. And my son Jeff worked in London for a couple of years after he graduated from the U in the early 80s. And a friend of his from India had gone to London and was working on the campaign to free the Siberian Seven. There were two families, Russian Christian families who lived in Siberia, and one of their young boys was going to be drafted. And at that time, if you were drafted into the Russian army, you sometimes, especially if you were from a dissident family and they wanted to keep you quiet, some of those kids were drafted at age 16 and had to serve until they were 45. And so they wanted to get this kid out of that town, and they came to Moscow. And it was during a time when there were some Americans there, and the Russians were trying to make things look a little better. But there was this family of 7 people, or 2 families, hid out in the bushes outside the American embassy. And when they went to the door to let somebody else in, they rushed the door and requested asylum. And they lived in the basement of the American Embassy in Moscow for 5 years. And my son went to London to help work on that campaign. So we did a thing at the U of M, somewhere in the early 80s. And I was working with Steve Feinstein at that time, and we had a group of Jews who were all carrying signs on behalf of the Soviet Jews with pictures of Anatoly and various people, Ida Nudel. And then they invited us to come and bring the pictures of Christians. So my son sent me these pictures from London, and we had pictures of the Siberian Seven, and we were all hanging out over on the West Bank. There was a Russian trade delegation that was coming for a conference at the U. And so big deal. They're so happy to be doing this peacemaking thing. And here we all showed up with our signs of, the imprisoned people in Russia. And so we're standing out there, but the bus with the trade group was late. And it was a nice sunny day when we first came, and we're all standing there waving our signs. And all of a sudden it started to rain. So we hid in a little bus stop and piled all our signs over in the corners so they wouldn't get wet. And we were there for about 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden the sun came out, the bus pulled up, we grabbed our signs and went running out and saying, peace is fine, but remember these people, they're in prison. But as I looked around our little group, all of the Jews were holding the signs for the Siberian Seven, and all of our group were holding the signs for the Jewish dissidents. And I always said I felt that God was smiling at us that day, and that some of the relationships, Minneapolis used to be known as the most anti-Semitic city in North America, and the fact that that changed, I think, had a big movement on that particular day. So anyway, I'm thrilled to have had a very small part in that. But on February 11th of 1986, big news, Israel was going to welcome Sharansky, hero for our time. And here he is arriving in Israel, surrounded by Peres and some of the other leaders in Israel. After 12 years away from Avital and 9 years in prison, he arrived. It was a prisoner exchange. And that's a funny story too, is because I remember following that very closely. At the time, the American ambassador met him eventually, but the Russians flew him into East Germany. And then there's a place there where a bridge connects over a river from East and West Germany. I see Debbie's nodding, she's probably been there. And so they got him off the plane and took him in a car up to this bridge. And then but they had taken away his book of Psalms, and Avital had sent him that while he was in prison, and he used that to teach himself Hebrew. He knew a little Hebrew to begin with, and he had 9 years to work on his Hebrew, and he learned it all from the book of Psalms. It was the only Hebrew book he had. And they'd taken it away from him when they were packing him up to go, and they'd given him some of his street clothes back. In fact, the funny thing, where you see the movie of him going across that bridge, he was trying to hold on to his stuff and hold his pants up because he's lost so much weight in prison that his clothes were falling off of him. But anyway, they brought him to this bridge. Here we see him, getting out of the car, and he crossed the bridge from East Germany to the west at the Glenicki Bridge. And the newly freed prisoner walked a long, slow zigzag course across the bridge. They finally gave him the Bible back, or his Psalm book, because he sat down in the snow. And he said, I'm not going until you give me my Psalm back. And all of the people who were following him to push him on, trying to make him go, he lay down in the snow and began to scream, give me my Psalms, give me my Psalms. And they finally gave him this little book. It's just a little book. You see a picture of it here. But anyway, and then they said, walk straight across the bridge. So when he got to the bridge, he went to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, slowly walking circles across the bridge, just to have his last act of defiance in the face of his oppressors. Turning to the right and the left, he walked in slow zigzag course to freedom. But here's the bridge that goes across the river there. And actually, where it comes in, just a little bit outside of Berlin, is the town of Wannsee, where the Wannsee Conference was held in 1942, where they planned the murder of the Jews. But he made it to Israel. And 6 months later, in August of 86, his mother, Ida Milgram, was also released to come. And she had been so faithful to him while he was in prison. They wouldn't let her in very often, but she would come with, bread for him, or, a book or something. And sometimes they'd let him have it, and usually they'd take things away. They had taken away his psalm. Well, when his psalm book first arrived, they didn't give it to him for 3 years. He knew that it had arrived and that his wife had sent it to him, because one of the people who would go back and forth and talk to her in Jerusalem. But anyway, he finally got his psalm book, and his mother finally arrived and got to go to Israel too. So here we see his mother, Ida, and Avital and Natan on an elevator I think this was taken when all of them were allowed, after communism fell, they were allowed to go back to Moscow, and he wanted his mother and his wife to go with him to this prison that he was in, and they actually visited the prison many years later. But anyway, and here is the Psalm book, and it almost had fallen apart. You see a picture of it here with the binding coming off, and some woman in Jerusalem who has a little business restoring old books had restored it for him. So now it's in better shape. So he has his Psalm book now. But anyway, this is the end of this part, but I just kind of wanted to introduce this to you. At the end of his autobiography, Sharansky writes about his very last moments in imprisonment, all of those years ago, just before he stepped onto the plane that would take him to freedom. That's where he said, "Where's my Psalm book?" And they said, "We've given you everything that was permitted. Get going." And these people were pushing him to, so that's what he sat down in the snow and wouldn't move until he got his Psalm book. And finally they gave it to him. So they had it, they just weren't going to give it to him. And the local photographers, of course, all the press were there to take pictures of him coming to freedom. And they were so scared that, that he was going to be taken away. They pointed their cameras to the sky. And after a brief consultation, they gave him a Psalm book. He said, "I got up and quickly mounted the ramp. In the dark world of suffering and injustice, one small black book gave light to the imprisoned Sharansky. It was a reminder of his Jewish heritage. It was a reminder of his wife, Avital, who sent him the book when he was in prison. It was what provided him with the strength to survive those terrible times." But anyway, we'll close this one down now. And Ilan, do you have the link to that other film?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to?
Yeah. Would you mind doing that for me?
Yes. So you will have to stop your presentation. Do you know how to do it, or?
Let's see. How do I do it? Stop share.
Actually, yeah. Here we go.
Okay.
Wonderful. Now
Very
we can go back to a regular view, and yeah, everybody can unmute yourself if you want to.
Thank you, JoAnn. That was wonderful.
That was awesome.
Really
That
good.
was great.
Well, you can tell it's a story that means a lot to me.
Yeah, very
I'm
personal.
one of the housewives from Minneapolis that send postcards. Right.
And JoAnn, I think that everything that is in the quiz you actually covered in your presentation, right?
Well, maybe not all of it. I think there's some things on that other film.
Okay, because the other film is 45 minutes. It will go until 9 o'clock.
Well, hopefully
And I want to know if people then will stay after that. That way I was asking if if you want to do the quiz first or the film first, your decision.
I'd like to do the film, I
The
think,
film. Okay,
kind
good.
of into the.
Now, you
info.
sent me 2 links.
Well, this is the longer one,
One to a very short one and one to the,
the long one.
you want to do the 45 minutes one right
Yep.
now?
Mhm, yeah,
Okay, hold on.
because that's an interview with him.
Yes. I'm preparing it. Hold on. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute you again. So, so. Sorry, I'm redoing that. Make sure that I'm optimizing it for video too.
This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution and the 26th year since the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Does the long communist experiment in Russia still matter? With us today, Natan Sharansky, who spent 9 years in Soviet prisons. Yes, Mr. Sharansky says, it still matters. Natan Sharansky on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Born to a Jewish family in the Soviet Union in 1948, Natan Sharansky became a chess prodigy, then studied at the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, roughly speaking the Soviet equivalent of our own MIT. Although his training placed him in the comfortable ranks of the upper levels of Soviet society, he requested an exit visa to Israel, a request the Soviets denied, and then became a human rights activist, serving as a spokesman for the Moscow-Helsinki Group. Arrested on charges of treason in 1977, Mr. Sharansky spent 9 years in Soviet prisons. After President Reagan and others pressured the Soviets to release Mr. Sharansky, in 1986 he was finally permitted to emigrate to Israel. Since then, Mr. Sharansky has become a senior figure in Israeli politics. Natan Sharansky, welcome.
Thank you very much.
In just a moment, we'll turn to your classic memoir, Fear No Evil. But first, if I may this, as I said, this is 100 years since the Russian Revolution, and I was Googling around on the internet, and I found that there's a T-shirt that's especially popular. So is it good news that communism has been so completely forgotten that kids feel free to wear T-shirts about Karl Marx? Or is that bad news in some way?
Well, it's both. It's good news that I feel like vindicated against all those ideologists or my interrogators who lived with this feeling that they are creating empire for the next 1,000 years. And so to think that now nobody even remembers that there was such empire, it's good to know. On the other hand, the idea which was at the base of this awful experiment, which was called communism, the idea that in order that there will be equality and happiness in this world, we have to erase identities, to erase religion, to make everybody equal by taking their property from them. And then we, the state, the society, we will share it equally, that everybody will be of the same opinions, of the same passionate or non-passionate attitude to history, to nationality, to religion. It's coming back. All this postmodernism, you know, the moment communism went into crisis, started dying as the idea. Postmodernism was born. Some of the leaders were Marxists, who were members of Communist Party of Britain or France or some others, but it's finished. Nobody can now defend communism after millions of people were killed for in the name of this awful idea. And now it's coming in the new form. So it's very important to remember what it meant ideologically and how far it could go into killing tens of millions of the people for the sake of this idea.
So let's spend a moment or two talking about what life in the Soviet Union was like. From your memoir, Fear No Evil, I was only 5 when Stalin died, but the memory of that day in 1953 is still clear in my mind. This was when I first learned that in order to survive in Soviet society, you had to function on 2 levels at once. Yeah. Explain that.
Okay, that's a very important point for understanding any dictatorship. And I got it as a practical knowledge in the age of 5. I come at home, Stalin died. My father makes sure that the neighbors don't hear us because we lived like 3-5 families in one apartment, and explains me that we as Jews should be very happy that he died. It was an awful man. He killed a lot of people. We Jews were now in big danger. But now, because he died, probably we are saved. And he said, well, he didn't say probably, he didn't want to frighten me too much. He said, be happy. Remember, miracle happened. He didn't say that that's Purim, that's great Jewish celebration. But he did say that miracle happened, Stalin died. But he said, don't tell it to anybody. Do what everybody does. And next day, I go to kindergarten, and I cry together with all the children about death of the son of all the people, Stalin. And we sing songs, how grateful we are to Stalin for the childhood which he gave us. So I sing songs, how we are grateful to Stalin. I cry together with all the children, and I remember I should be very happy that Stalin died. That's typical state of mind of loyal Soviet citizen who knows that he has to do what he is told to do. He has to vote the way he is told to do. He can read the books which are permitted to read. He can express the ideas which are approved, but it's all false. The real world is only for you, your closest family, your closest friends. And that's situation of double think. It's typical situation of majority of citizens under dictatorship. And the longer dictatorship exists, the more people are not true believers, they are double thinkers. And because the world doesn't understand it, the world looks at these dictatorships and think, oh, they're so strong, they're so threatening.
Can you also in Fear No Evil, you write about your father. Papa was born in Odessa in 1904, which made him 13 at the time of the revolution. 13, 100 years ago when the revolution took place. Like most of his generation, Papa had believed that the revolution would solve the Jewish problem and that the destiny of the Jews was to work together with other peoples to create an earthly paradise. Well, we're devoting this to what went wrong. But first, what did they believe? If I asked you to make the best argument you could for communism 100 years ago, what was it that your father thought he saw?
I'll tell you exactly. This week we are celebrating 100 years to Bolshevik Revolution.
Right.
It's also the same, almost the same day, 100 years of Balfour Declaration. Yes. Balfour Declaration, that's the first political Zionist document recognizing Jewish homeland. So there were many, many Jewish families which were really split, including the family of my father. One son says, finally we can build our own state. And the other says, but why do we need it? Now that finally we can be part of the bigger world, we don't have to be the people of one small shtetl, of one small nation. We can now work for the equality and happiness of all the people in the world. And those who really believed that is the right way, they helped directly or indirectly to create one of the most awful regimes in the world.
But if there was a moment when intelligent people of goodwill could say, yes, this revolution looks hopeful.
Well, I would say that the very first weeks, of course, there was hope. No, majority of people didn't know what it really means. They only heard these slogans. Then, very quickly, those who wanted to understand, they already in a couple of years, they could understand that there will be no law, there will be no value of human life, and so on. Those who wanted to continue deceiving themselves continued for 10, 15, 20 years until this ideology killed them themselves. And the most sad thing that so many intellectuals in the West, in the free world, like in 1937, the moment of the highest level of killing,
show trials,
Red Terror,
purges,
Stalin purges, and so on, comes one of the intellectual leaders of Europe, author Leon Feuchtwanger, to Moscow. Stalin takes him, permits him to go to open trials, and he writes from there that while we, the capitalism, are so preoccupied to compete with one another, to exploit one another, to make unhappy one another, here everybody here is full of happiness. Even those people who are on the trial, they are also part of this ideology. So you must be really crazy, one would think, but there are so many people in the West who wanted to convince themselves that the idea is so good that even if you have to kill some, even if there'll be, as Lenin wrote, in 1918 he wrote, even if we'll have to kill a few hundred capitalists, but for the sake of this great idea of happiness for everybody, it historically doesn't matter anything. And then they killed tens of millions, and it still doesn't matter.
Again, fear no evil. In 1973, I joined the Aliyah movement of Jews who were struggling for their right to emigrate to Israel. At the age of 25, I finally learned what a joy it was to be free. Yeah. You were still in the Soviet Union. What do you mean that you felt free?
Well, people under totalitarian regime, when they already don't believe in this official ideology, when they are not true believers, and majority of people then don't believe. So they are double thinkers. They have to live under the permanent self-control, what they can say, what they can do, to remember with whom they are talking, if he's in form of KGB or not. And it's very depressing. People are used to it, and they don't understand what kind of intellectual prison they live in. When you finally has enough courage or energy or desire to start saying things that you really believe in, suddenly, of course, physically your life changed. The moment I said publicly that I don't want to live in this country, I want to leave this country, I want to go to Israel, you are losing your job, your apartment will be searched, you'll be called for interrogations to KGB. Some of your friends will ask to take their telephones from your notebook in order they will not be called to KGB. But you are not controlling your thoughts anymore. You're saying and doing things that you really believe in. That's real freedom. So I was really lucky to discover at the age of 25 my identity and my freedom. And they were both very closely connected.
Again, fear no evil. Shortly after 6 o'clock on the evening of March 15th, 1977, I was abducted by the KGB outside an apartment on Gorky Street in downtown Moscow. I spent the next 9 years in prison and labor camp, including more than 400 days in punishment cells and more than 200 days on hunger strikes. And during your first few days in prison, you write, I repeated a principle over and over until it was part of me. Nothing they do can humiliate me. Only I can humiliate myself. What did you mean?
Well, as just now I said that I discovered that freedom is inner feeling. It's not whether you are in a luxurious hotel or you're in a small prison, or you are free to do things you believe in and to say things that you really think, or you are not free to do it. So freedom belongs only to you, and you can betray it, and then you will feel humiliated by betrayal of your own freedom. Well, later when I became more religious, I would say by betraying the image of God in which the people are created. But of course, KGB, repressive regime, thinks that they can destroy you by humiliating you. That the moment you feel yourself humiliated, you will lose self-respect. Then it's much easier for them to break you during interrogations. And they have many ways to humiliate you. So if you don't protect yourself by saying from the very beginning, whatever they do, it has nothing to do with you, with your honor, with your independence, with your freedom. It's only yours. Freedom is yours. Your self-respect is yours. Your opportunities to influence on the world, it all depends only on you, not on them. That's how I built my defense.
You were interrogated 110 times. Again, I'm quoting from Fear No Evil. Where they had once used force, the KGB now preferred to engage you in long conversations, trying to manipulate you with explanations, threats, promises, hints, and more threats, close quote. And you mentioned a moment ago that at an earlier stage, there were true believers, but by the time we're in the Brezhnev era, by the time you're imprisoned, it's doublethink.
Yeah.
This is, I think for even Americans who try very hard to understand the history of the Soviet Union, how did that transition from true believers to Stalin and the bullets in the back of the head to this world in which you get the eyewitness accounts, yours among others, people didn't believe anymore, but they were somehow stuck in this system of double think, double belief. And instead of shooting prisoners, now we're engaging in these long, horrifying interrogations. What was the point of it all? And how did it perpetuate itself if people had ceased really believing in it?
No, look, first of all, there are many people who didn't believe, but lived under fear. So the system controls people through fear. And it's not necessarily fear that you'll be sentenced to death. It can be fear that you will lose your work, that you will not be promoted, that you want to be the head of clinics, but you can be only doctor if you will dare to speak publicly what you think. So all types of fears through which the system controls the lives of the people. Now, when you are asking about interrogators, I think majority of them also didn't believe in anything. The attitude was very cynical. It was good for them. The system gave them opportunity of comfortable life, and they will always say to their own consciousness that historically then probably it's the right thing to do. And they tried not to think too much, because the moment they start going to the details, it's very difficult for them to
live with themselves.
To live with themselves, yeah. So they don't think too much.
In early 1980, you write, the last question about the Gulag, your time in prison. The official in charge of storing prisoners' belongings, for some reason, returned to you your small copy of the Psalms in Hebrew. You had been using the Psalms to learn Hebrew. And you write in Fear No Evil, the words lifted me above the mundane and directed me toward the eternal. I especially liked Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. How did you understand? You became a religious man, but you started not particular. Why did those words move you? It feels almost they moved you before you had an analysis of them.
I have to say it was even more dramatic than you just now said. A few days before my arrest, I received the small psalm book from the tourist from my wife. And my wife was already for 2 years in Israel. And we hoped that we'll be together like a few months after she will leave, and she left next day after our marriage, and we met 12 years after. But so she sent me this psalm book, and she writes a note, which a tourist brought me, that it was with me for the last year, and I have a feeling that the time has come to send this book to you. I opened this small book. If you didn't get special education how to read ancient Hebrew texts, you will not even understand where is the end of the phrase at the beginning, because the signs are different. And most of the words I don't know. I knew Hebrew, demonstration, protest, visa, basic Hebrew which we needed. So I put it aside and decided, okay, I don't have now time. It's very nice of Vital, good that you did it, but it was just the moment of arrest of some of my colleagues. I was organizing many press conferences for Jewish movement and for human rights movement. A few days after this, I was arrested. And when they bring me the list of what they confiscated, there is this small black book, not in Russian, that was written. And I understand that it's about, I start demanding that they'll give it to me. For 3 years, I was insisting that they'll give it to me. They gave it to me together with the telegram that my father passed away. So it was 3 years after I went to prison. So what can I do? I cannot be with my mother, I cannot be with my family. So I decided I'll read Psalms until I understand what it is about. So I started reading this book, and how I can understand even where is the end and the beginning of the phrase. So I was a mathematician, so I simply started using logic, comparing the word which in different sentences, and then comparing it with others. And it happened so that from this ocean of words, the first phrase, which I understood fully, here is the beginning and the end, and here are 13 short words. And when I go through the valley of death, I'll fear no fear. And suddenly it jumped on me. So who brought it to me? My wife, King David, God, Israel, all of them together came to prison to say me, don't fear any evil, we are with you. And so that was a very powerful message. And of course, since then, this book is always with me. When I left
That's
Soviet
the actual
prison,
book?
of course, I was lying in the snow and I refused to move until they gave it to me when I when the airplane was waiting to take me to Berlin from prison.
You were finally released in 1986. You flew to Israel, but not long afterwards, you paid a visit to President Reagan. And we speechwriters, I was a speechwriter on the Reagan speechwriting staff at the time, we were told that you told the president that his speeches meant a great deal to you in prison, that somehow or other brief excerpts of his speeches made it into prison and you would pass them from prisoner to prisoner in little strips of paper. Is that correct?
I have to disappoint you. We didn't have an opportunity to read the speeches. But if you are not in a punishing cell, you can read Soviet newspaper Pravda. And here was, you see, suddenly in Pravda, there is an angry article that the president of the United States called Soviet Union evil empire. That's unprecedented. That's against all the norms, all the detente, and how he dared, and whatever. Oh, they're all very angry words. And we were so excited. I told them later, the president, that was the best day for us in prison. And I can explain why. Because we dissidents felt, always wrote about it, how weak the system is because of this double thing, how it is falling from inside. And the only thing which helps it to survive is the fact that the world is scared and prefers to cooperate with them and to help them in order not to challenge them. And so if only the world will understand the real nature of this regime and how weak this regime, then its days will be counted. That was our theory. Here finally comes the leader of the United States of America and informs the world, and us in prison through the Soviet Pravda, that that's evil empire and it has no hope for the future because it deprives people of freedom. What can be better? So yeah, I remember how suddenly I read this and become very excited that I realized that downstairs there is one of our friends is at this moment the punching cell. In punching cell you don't read Soviet newspaper. So I started sending him immediately by Morse. That's how we spoke, by Morse, that American president called Soviet Union evil empire. And he was calling it, hurrah, finally. So it was for us that finally the world starts understanding some very basic things. So that was made us very happy.
For 30 years, I've been wanting to ask you this.
Yeah.
So I'd like to play a couple of clips of Reagan speeches, and you tell us if he and his speechwriters got it right.
Yeah, okay.
June 8th, 1982, President Reagan speaks to the British Parliament.
But I believe we live now at a turning point. In an ironic sense, Karl Marx was right. We are witnessing today a great revolutionary crisis, a crisis where the demands of the economic order are conflicting directly with those of the political order. But the crisis is happening not in the free, non-Marxist West, but in the home of Marxist-Leninism, the Soviet Union.
So here's the kind of criticism that President Reagan received. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the famous historian, quote, "Those in the US who think the Soviet Union is on the verge of economic and social collapse are only kidding themselves." Who was right?
Well, I listened and I'm laughing. Why I'm laughing? Because dissidents in prison were saying exactly this, exactly. And I remember Vladimir Bolkhonov, one of my cellmates, who was serious economist, but then they tried to escape to the West, and so he was arrested. And all information which he has, the Soviet newspaper Pravda. And he every day counts and tells them, understand, they can't even, they are building the railroad, and they report that it exists, doesn't exist in the paper I counted. The production of coal and this is lower than 10 years ago. They're going down. So he simply compares different figures which he read. At the same time, the so-called Sovietologists are believing in all the nonsense which Soviet Union writes that in 20 years there will be communism, we will be bigger than the United States in economy in 70 years, and all this nonsense. And even, I think, a few years before Soviet Union fell apart, there were still leading Sovietologists who were explaining that Soviet Union is strong, it's forever. This is simply because they knew how weak it's from inside. So when they look professional and all the things, they see the different world. So here, the President of the United States of America is saying the same what my prison cell said. So my prison cell, Vladimir Bolkhonov, could be heard only by me. He could be heard by all the world. Why the world didn't believe him? I really don't understand it. But thanks God that there were people like he and Margaret Thatcher who got it right.
One more clip here.
So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all, and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Evil empire. He was denounced everywhere.
Yeah, but it's very important that he pulled it on the level of principle, that we have to understand that in principle, agreements between democracy and dictatorships are two different things, because in democracy, you can rely on the fact that the government has to satisfy these people. In the evil empire, the government doesn't depend on the people. People depend on the government. So the government must have an external enemy and permanently to mobilize their people to fight. So any agreement will not make them more peaceful to you. Any agreement has to be controlled first of all by your power. And the fact that President Reagan and his representatives on the negotiations with Soviet Union made direct linkage. We cannot trust you because you keep people in prison. And because of this, we cannot go so far and so far on our disarmament agreement. There were many people saying, how can he connect disarmament with the people in prison? But what was really understood that the real power of this system is defined by the fact how they control their people. The moment they make the dissidents out of prison, they don't control their people. And then they are becoming weak.
One last Reagan clip that I'd like to ask you to comment on. And bear in mind that the State Department and the National Security Council both wanted the passage that you're about to see deleted from the speech.
We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
Great speech.
It's a big line after this applause.
Mr. Gorbachev,
Big down the board.
Yes.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
So, too provocative?
No,
Over the top?
two things. No, great speech, for sure, great speech. But you say that State Department was against. Two things. First of all, when I came to President Reagan first time.
1986.
1986, May 1986, and to thank him. He was personally very involved, and he met with my wife, and then he spent a lot of efforts pressing on Gorbachev, and I was the first political prisoner who was released because of this. So I had personal thanks. But also I told him what a great day in prison was this speech. And then when he heard it, he made me to repeat that everybody has to hear. And then I realized that he had a lot of headache with that speech. That's first. Second, I want to say, a year and a half after this, Gorbachev is going to come for the first time to United States of America. I come with the idea that when Gorbachev comes, let's hundreds of thousands of American Jews will march on Washington. And that happened in the end, but there were like few months of hot discussions. There were some people in the Jewish community who were afraid that while everybody wants, who loves Gorbachev, everybody wants peace, we Jews will be troublemakers. We will be against the desire of American people to celebrate peace and detente. And instead of this, we'll have demonstration. Well, I thought it's absolutely wrong. That reaction of the Americans will be different. But who am I to argue with? I went to the students and everybody wanted this demonstration. But on the level of some bureaucrats, there was a real fear that we cannot put our Jewish community in such a situation. So what I decided to do, I decided to ask Reagan. I sent a word to the White House that my wife met Reagan and I met Reagan, but it's the first time that we are together in America, and we want to say him thank you together. And he immediately agreed for the meeting, and he looked at us like a proud grandfather looking at us because he was really very happy. So then, but you know, it was already the time when he started confusing some words. So he said to me, and by the way, he said to me, dear Mr. and Mrs. Sharansky was foreign minister of Soviet Union. I just had a conversation with Foreign Minister Sharansky, and I told him, you'll better let Soviet Jews So people are a little bit embarrassed, but I didn't care. I said, Mr. President, soon you'll see Gorbachev himself. I want you to know that many of us, American Jews and us, want to organize big demonstration of protest. And I want you to understand that it's not against your policy. And I was looking for the words. He stopped me and he said, what? Somebody can think that I will be against it? Of course, somebody think that I would like to be friends with Gorbachev when he keeps people in prison. Do everything what you have to do, and they'll do what I have to do. So I went out and said, even Reagan wants us to have this demonstration, why you should be against. But what's important, I later give examples of this saying. I know many politicians. For politicians today, it's so important to know the names of everybody in their party, in their central committee, to know the dates of birth, to know the days of bar mitzvah, not to confuse it. But when it comes to what is good and what is bad, full confusion. Here's a person who already started forgetting the names. But when it comes to what is right and what is wrong to do, he was so clear. His reaction was immediate, without any hesitation.
How it ended.
Yeah.
There are two fundamentally competing narratives of the way the Cold War ended. One is one holds that the West, Reagan, Thatcher, Pope John Paul II place increasing moral, economic, military pressure on the Soviet Union, and they undermine Soviet morale until the Soviet Union collapses. But the West places pressures on the system that the system cannot bear. The other narrative, let's call it the Gorbachev thesis, holds that the Soviet Union collapsed for entirely internal reasons. I found this quotation. Gorbachev was interviewed when he came to Washington for Reagan's funeral. And when he was asked if the United States won the Cold War, Gorbachev replied, "That's not serious." He said, "We were increasingly behind the West, and I was ashamed for my country. We couldn't provide toothpaste for our own people." Nothing to do with what you were doing, you in the West were doing. It was entirely internal. We were suffering economic problems, and that was what brought us down. How did it end?
Well, for me, it's obvious. Of course, Soviet Union fell because of the internal weakness. And this internal weakness was demonstrated to the world by dissidents. They were those who understood its weakness. They were those who were connected to this double think. They were those who already crossed this line. And they knew that millions will do the same. They also were those who were explaining to the West that the only source of economical power which Soviet Union has is the fact that it knows how to deceive the West and how to get cooperation with the West. Because economy, it's more and more difficult to run an economy based on slaves. So that's why it was so important that at some moment the West will start listening to this and linking the question of human rights with the question of economical cooperation. It started from Senator Jackson, the very great
Scoop Jackson.
Scoop Jackson, Democrat, who for the first time made direct linkage between freedom of immigration and status of most favored nation. And then it continued when we succeeded to turn Helsinki Agreement from non-binding and something very binding. Of course, we paid by prison for this, but and so and then it reached even armament negotiations, Star Wars. Just at the moment when Soviet Union was so desperate in having big economical difficulties and trying to convince the world, the Western world, that's the time to stop our competition. In fact, Reagan said, we will start competing with you and you can try to be as quick and as good as we are. And Soviet Union had no chance. So of course it was just good that Gorbachev, who was a relatively young leader, came and understood that they have all these huge problems, and he has to start giving up, releasing prisoners, decreasing pressure. But why he understood it? Only because there was such a pressure, and because the economical system didn't work. So when I am asked who is responsible for bringing down the Soviet Union, I always say, first of all, it's dissidents like Andrei Sakharov, then it's politicians like Reagan and Senator Jackson, And then, of course, Gorbachev also was important. Gorbachev, by the way, took it very personal once we appeared together, and he said, I released you, and you say that I am on the third place after Reagan and after Sakharov. What can I do? That's
One more passage from Fear No Evil. You're writing here about after your release. You're writing from Jerusalem after 9 years in prison. In the punishment cell, life was much simpler. Every day brought only one choice, good or evil, white or black, saying yes or no to the KGB. In freedom, I am lost in a myriad of choices. When I walk on the street, dozens of cheeses, fruits, and juices stare at me from store windows. What to drink in the morning, coffee or tea, what newspaper to read, where to go for Sabbath. How to enjoy the vivid colors of freedom without losing the existential depth I felt in prison. How to retain that unique feeling of the interconnection of human souls which I discovered in the Gulag. These are the questions I must answer in my new life. Now, we've spoken a couple of times about the younger generation in the West. In my mind, of course, I'm an American, the younger generation of Americans, it's been more than 25 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. They have no memory at all. And all kinds of polls show that they're dubious about the capitalist system. In the last presidential election, young people disproportionately supported Bernie Sanders. Is it the case that they're searching for the kind of existential depth that you discovered in prison, some kind of meaning, and that day-to-day, ordinary capitalist life doesn't provide it? That freedom, as we experience it, is its own solvent, that it leads people to search for something deeper?
Yeah, well, first of all, before criticizing young generation, which never lived under communism, let's remember that the time when communism existed, there were so many people in the free world who refused to recognize the nature of communism. So, second, yeah, I think nothing can replace the inner experience of people, their own search for justice and for freedom and so on. And for example, I can say that dealing a lot with young Jews on the campuses today, I can say that many young Jews are trying to find the answer to the same question which I had when I was young, saying that should we work for the better of all the world or for ourselves, for our own people? And if you really believe that you have to choose, you always will choose better of all the world. And then you can go to the romantics of communism or something else. But if you understand what I understood very well, that if you want to make the world better, you must have strong identity. You must have base, history that you want to belong to. People that make your story bigger than your own story. There are some great principles which are more important for you than physical life. Then, when you have this base, you can make the world better. So I think this need to keep together our desire to belong and our desire to be free is something very important, which our world very often loses. Look at Europe, which decided that identity is the enemy of freedom, and as the result, trying to get rid of its own identity became powerless. Life almost without meaning, life which doesn't give you strength to fight against real threats to your freedom. So all this postmodern world is in a real danger because it's losing its identity in order to enjoy freedom and cannot even defend their freedom. On the other hand, Middle East, there are all these strong identities which are against freedom. And here I always give example of Israel. We are part of Middle East, but we insist we are democracy. And we are part of free world, but we insist we are Jewish state. So we are going against these both tendencies in the Middle East of dictatorship and in the free world of postmodern and post-identity. But that's the only way really to enjoy full, meaningful life and to be free.
Last couple of questions. summary, a summary state. If you could, can you reduce to one sentence what young Americans most need to know, to cling to about the Soviet Union?
Soviet Union tried to turn people in the cog of big machine which existed in the imagination of the communism. That people have to be deprived of their individuality in order to be good cogs of this big robot. And that's the danger of any totalitarian ideology.
And can you give them one sentence of young Americans, what they most should grasp and hold on to about the United States itself?
Well, it's very simple, freedom. Freedom begins from inside, but it is the world outside which gives you opportunity to enjoy it. And America is the country which is not only a good place for shopping, but good place also to enjoy your freedom, if you know how to be free.
Natan Sharansky, thank you. I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Whew,
Yeah, was it good?
that's good.
You can all unmute yourself.
We should listen to what he had to say,
Mm-hmm.
what's
Yeah.
going on in our own country right now.
Yeah.
He's a very smart man.
Yes, it is. Actually, I was gonna
Elon, I don't think we'll do the other film.
yeah. I'm thinking, and I just want to share before we do the quiz. Still want to do the quiz. And but in 2004, he published a book called The Case for Democracy.
Mhm.
And actually, JoAnn, do you know who he wrote it with? The time wasn't well known, but he wrote it with Ron
I
Der-
read
he
the
wrote it
book
with-
and I think I loaned it out and I don't have it anymore, but,
So
and I
he
don't
wrote-
remember who he wrote it with, but.
He wrote it with Ron Dermer, the one that
Oh, yeah,
later
that's
became,
right. It was Ron Durham.
He became the Israeli ambassador to the U.S.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
We just finished his, so the funny thing is that the book came out in English before it came out in Hebrew.
Mhm. This one also, this new one.
So I bought it here as it came out, and I bought it because I was gonna take it was literally hot from just like first few copies,
Mhm.
and I was heading actually to Israel, and I bought the book so I can read it on the way to Israel. And that's what I did. It's a long flight. It's a long enough flight that you can finish a book actually.
Right.
So actually by the time I got to Israel, I finished. And I went to my little secret hotel in Jerusalem, my favorite kind of secret hotel, a very, very central place, but not too expensive. It's not fancy, but that was all I needed usually when I'm in Jerusalem. And the first night I'm there, I'm going to a little Italian restaurant, literally around the corner. And I walk in and I sit there. And as I sit down, I see a man sit by himself and waiting. And I'm looking and I can't believe that's Natan Sharansky sitting right there.
Oh,
So
did you have your book with you?
no, it was in my hotel room. So was with my Israeli chutzpah, I approach him and I'm saying, Mar Sharansky, I don't know. I mean, I can't call it coincidence. It must be a miracle. But actually, I just finished reading your book, The Case for the. He said, "How can you read that? It's not even available." I just arrived from the U.S. Was one of the first copies, and I read it, and he's like, "Wow," and I said, "So, if you don't mind, I don't know if you're like just planning on living, paying your bill or whatever. Do you mind if I'll run to my hotel rooms, bring the book, and bring it back so you can sign it?" He's saying, "No, actually, I'm waiting for my wife, He, said, no, I didn't even start eating and ordering. Yeah, sure, go ahead. So I run to the hotel. I come back after 5 minutes. He's there, and I'm giving him a book. And of course, he asked me, "What is your name?" Because he wants to write the dedication. I tell him Ilan Sharon. He looks at me and he starts smiling, saying, "Sharon, Ilan Sharon." And I'm like, "Oh, what did I do?" And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret." He said, I was Anatoly Sharansky in Russia, right? Now, everyone knows that he changed his first name to Natan. Not many people know that when he immigrated to Israel, when he made Aliyah, he changed his last name to Sharon.
Oh,
So actually his real name in Israel, in his ID card in Israel, is Natan Sharon. He decided because if he will say Natan Sharon, nobody will know who he is.
oh my gosh.
Sharansky and people will connect it, right? But if he will say Anatoly Sharon, no one will know who he is. So he still goes by Sharansky, in places where people know the name Sharansky. But his real last name is Sharon.
Wow.
Wrote me a dedication. We talked a little bit about things that I was doing
Oh my
and all
gosh.
that. But
Did he sign it both ways then in your book?
no, he
Just
actually, you know what? I need to go back. It was 2004, so I'm getting old. It's like what, 7 years ago? I need to go and find it. I want you to know that this book, actually, one of the biggest fans of this book was President George W. Bush.
oh,
Actually, George W. Bush read the whole book,
Yeah.
and then he asked Sharansky if he can come and meet with him, like for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, about the book. They ended up talking like one-on-one for about an hour and a half.
oh,
Because a lot of this book was dealing how to fight like terrorism, with
Do you know he
and
was
all
2
that.
times in Minnesota?
Sorry.
He was 2 times.
Yes.
In Minnesota.
I saw him here in Minnesota too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh.
I saw him.
Dr. Sharon.
I saw him later at
First time.
Adas Jeshurun congregation. Remember?
Yeah, it was second time.
Him too.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So
That
that's
is so cool.
yeah.
But you guys, I had to look it up even on my other screen of what's a GOG, and I still don't understand it.
You
You know,
mean the
good
gula, when
God,
you said
you-
the gula? What?
No, in the very end, about communism and what they mean is you have to be a good GOG. C-O-G.
A
Cog and a wheel. A spoke and a wheel.
A spoke and a wheel. Oh. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. By the way, it's really hard to understand. He's got a very heavy
Yeah.
and some voice is not strong. So actually, I think it's a good thing that they put subtitles.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Helped a
that
lot
was
of
really-
Americans.
I just thought that was such a good interview that Peter Robinson did. And I didn't realize until I heard that Peter Robinson had been a writer
for Reagan.
Reagan.
Yeah.
So
It's cool. That was really impactful.
It was.
Good.
JoAnn, was this what was shown last Thursday? Because I missed last Thursday.
no.
No.
This
That's
is about
was-
3. This was made, I think, in 2018.
Oh, okay.
It's a few years old, but I ran across it. I remember seeing it when it first came out. Uncommon Knowledge with Peter Robinson. He interviews a lot of conservative people, and I
Okay.
watch it fairly often. But you can find it online really easily.
I will be very interested in asking him about some of the things that happened last couple of years in the U.S.
Yeah.
If he still feels that people are free to voice their opinion, because obviously,
Right.
so
Well,
many
I
people
think
are
we've
being.
lost some of it recently.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. It's like almost like, one actually saying things, people might be afraid that there will be
No,
attack.
you have to
or-
think
or-
twice now, which
And-
is something
and-
that we haven't had to do before.
Yeah.
Also, or what happened when you have all these big tech controlling all the
Yeah.
a lot of the media and deciding who have a voice and who doesn't have a voice.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
So, and again, I'm sure people on different people on any, doesn't matter what side they're on,
Mhm.
many feel like they can't speak, or
Right.
others are not listening, so it's be interesting to have him speak about it. And
Mhm.
maybe, but anyway, that's just a thought. But anyway, are you all ready for the quiz?
Yes.
JoAnn prepared a great quiz. So you all know the drill. You want to go on your phone or any device. Well, actually, I even made it now. I believe that you can do it on the same device if you want to,
Oh, good.
because I think we made it so the question and the answers will be presented on your own phone, computer, iPad, like the question and the answers, so you can actually select them, right?
Right.
But first, you want to go to kahoot.it. Remember that?
Mhm.
Kahoot.it. I don't have to put it up anymore, right? Meaning you guys know.
Or download the app on your phone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or go to your Kahoot app, and you should be on this screen.
Yep.
Yes.
Is everybody there?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. So I'm going to generate now a unique pin code just for our game, just for our own game. So I'm going to maybe put that on a separate screen here so it'll be easier. And the name of the quiz is, oops, hold on, play. Asked. Show question and answers on player's device. Yes, that's what I want. Good. So now I can share my screen because it's gonna. You see the. You see the game pin on your screen?
Yep.
Put the game pin in. I'm missing Dave to ask Milan. Don't forget the music. We have 4 so far. We need another one.
Come on.
Come on. Or people left because it's late.
Yeah. But I did want them to see that film. I just thought that was a winner.
Okay.
Diane, where
Who
are you,
else
Diane?
is joining? We have 4. It's going to be last call before we're going to.
It timed out.
What timed out?
The signing in, did it time out?
No.
No.
Hi. Are you do you see?
No, I'm in. I'm in.
Okay, good. I'm going to mute everybody now, so when you shout the answers, no one else hear you. We'll be starting right now. Here we go. Start. So the question was, how old was Natan Sharansky when Stalin died? And all of you got it right. The answer is 5. He was 5 years old. The one that always get it wrong is myself. So there's always going to be one that is wrong. Please forgive me. And let's see how we did on the stand. There we go. So again, for the one play for the first time, you're asking, how come 3 people answer it right, but they get different points? Well, that's because Danny answered it faster than Dory. That's why. And Jeda, meaning that's how it works. The faster you answer right, the more points you get. But if you get it wrong, as you can see me as the host, you get 0. Let's go to the next question. The question was, what did Natan's mother teach him on that year that Stalin died? And the right answer is how to play chess, and all of you got it right. Let's see if someone answered it faster than others. Well, maybe, but it didn't change the standing so far. You're all still very close there. Let's go to the next question. The question was, where did Natan go to college? And the right answer is Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. And again, all of you got it right. Let's see the standing. Ooh, somebody's on fire here. Okay, let's go to the next question. That question was, how long after their wedding did Natan's wife leave for Israel? And the right answer is next day. And again, all of you got it right. Good going so far. And look at that, all of you are doing great. See, everybody here, meaning all of you getting like on fire. Okay, let's go to the next question. So the question was, who was the Soviet dissident who first influenced Natan Sharansky? And the right answer is Andrei Sakharov. And again, vast majority of you got it right. Let's see the standing. Changed a little bit here. Everybody's still only one question away. Next question. The question was, how many years was Natan in prison? And I think that was a record breaking. All of you answered it right. It's 9 years, and you did it very quickly. So Natan Sharansky was 9 years in prison. Standing remained pretty much the same. The question was, what was the charge that sent Natan to prison? And the right answer is treason. And again, all of you got it right. Standing is all still very close to each other, very, very close here. Let's go to the next question. The question was, what did President Reagan call the Soviet Union that encouraged the Jewish prisoners? And the right answer is evil empire. And again, all of you got it right. Very proud of you all. You're getting all of them correct today. Next question will be an interesting one. There's no points for it. We're just asking you to write something. Here we go. That's the standing. Here's the question. You can type your answer on your phone or on your device. By the way, after you send it, you still have time to write. Might ask you to pick up one word out of everything that you wrote. Meaning it will still show the whole answer, but great. All of us submitted answers. Let's read what people wrote. His courage, freedom, values that he holds dear to, and his courage to be truthful. These are all great things that he inspired us, and I agree with all of them. Let's go to the next question, which will be a double points. The question was, where was Natan Sharansky born? And the right answer is telling you Ukraine. Let's see the standings. Again, most of you got it right, but standings change. Well, maybe not. We have one more question with double points, so everything is possible. Let's go to the next question. This one, I also answered it right. What did their father teach Natan and his brother on the day that Stalin died? He told them to use double think. That's what he told them. And all of us got right. So it's time to call the truck with the medals and to do the podium presentation. There we go. Even I made it in this time. Even so they don't list me as number 4, but I did come on the 4th place. All right. How did you like it?
It was fun.
Unmute yourself.
If you guys knew how bad I was in school.
Hey.
But history was my favorite.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm the only one that, JoAnn, you're muted. And